What were the main stages that the Islamic Empire basically rise and then fall through? In this video, we'll explore the main phases that the Islamic Empire went through in its rise, in its renaissance, and in its downfall over the span of 1400 years. Islam, what I mean by Islam is the contemporary definition of Islam that started with the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and the revelation of the Quran. In the Islamic tradition, Islam has started a very long time ago because the meaning of Islam is the obedience and submission to God. So Islam started from the time of Adam and Eve and continued throughout the prophets and messengers of God. But to use the contemporary definition of what Islam is, we can say that it is the faith that has started with the sending of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and the revelation of the Quran 1455 years ago or so. So when the Quran came, when the revelation came, it started with a phase of basically new ideas, innovating new ideas into society and pushing these ideas into society. These ideas, they were very novel and they were very new. Things about equality, things about like how money should not be only maintained between the elites and the rich, how the concept of consultation and shura is. There were some like major principles, like for example, how do the different societies live together? What's the Islamic perspective on diversity? The freedom of belief and the freedom of thought, the idea that there is one God. This was something that's very novel back then, 1400 years ago. During this phase, we can call it, this is the phase of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, which lasted for about 23 years. This phase was characterized by those innovative ideas that started with the Quran and with the revelation that came with the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. After that, we can look at the next phase, which can be summed up in the caliphate, the four successors of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him: Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, and Ali. May Allah be pleased with them. As well as the beginning of the Umayyad Empire or the Umayyad Dynasty. And during this phase, what happened, the main characteristic of this phase was trying to preserve the faith. So, what that means is that the Muslims were busy basically collecting and preserving the Arabic language, collecting and preserving the Quran, collecting and preserving the Hadith, which is the prophetic tradition, the prophetic sayings. And basically, that phase was trying to protect this valuable divine revelation, as well as starting to develop the aspects of the sciences that lead to deduction of Islamic rulings. So, for example, usul al-fiqh, the foundation of jurisprudence or the principles of jurisprudence, and things like that. Now, this phase emerged into the Umayyad dynasty, during which the rulership has changed from being something that is of a democratic process into something that is inherited. Now, during this phase, the the Arabs back then, they did not have a lot of tools in governance. They had overarching values that are applicable to governance, but they didn't have applicable and manifestations of these overarching concepts. So the Umayyad dynasty started translating the books, especially the governance books from the Persian Empire and some of the other civilizations that were around. And the Umayyad Empire lasted uh, quite a bit of time, about almost maybe 100 years or so. And they basically started incorporating those philosophical uh, concepts that that basically are implemented within the governance system. After that, the Umayyad dynasty fell, and what happened is that the Abbasid dynasty came about, and we're talking right now about the first phase of the Abbasid dynasty. There are two phases to the Abbasid dynasty. The Abbasid dynasty. We're talking right now about the first one, which immediately succeeded the Umayyad dynasty. This phase lasted from about 750 to about 850, so about 800 years. And this was actually the phase in which all that philosophy of the Greek and the Indians, as well as some of the books that are related to, the approach to nature and whatnot, was being translated. Because right now the Muslims have certain way of ruling, which they have derived through some sort of hybrid between um, some books and some literatures that were and experiences that were translated from the Persian Empire and from other empires, as well as incorporating within there some of the Islamic values. So now they're looking for something more, and this is when they started to look for the natural sciences, physics, math, chemistry, and whatnot. And these are the applicable sciences. And at this Abbasid Empire, Abbasid dynasty, the first phase is when the renaissance of the Islamic Empire happened. This was the boom, pretty much, that basically expanded the Islamic Empire's knowledge and applications beyond what any other civilization would have seen around there. And the reason for that is that they added one more thing to the knowledge of humanity, which is the um, the ability to take theories and test them. So back in the day, during the times of the Greek, um, there were just theories. The way to derive knowledge was to sit there and think about it and contemplate what can be done, and then you would just write it down, and that's considered knowledge. When the Muslims came during the Abbasid dynasty, the first phase, they actually developed the approach to test these theories. So, for example, some of the philosophies that came from the Greek is that any sort of cheap metal can be turned into something that is a valuable metal, like turning things into gold and whatnot. Jabir ibn Hayyan, which was a scientist in the Islamic Empire, he was the first one to create a lab and try to test these theories and basically eliminate the ones that do not work. It is said that he had, 30 to 300 different theses in chemistry. And this was the time where um, the laboratory work started to take effect. And amidst this awesome phase, we passed into another phase, and this is the second phase of the Abbasid dynasty, which started from about 850 and it lasted until about 1250. And this is where basically the downfall of the Islamic Empire started. I'm not saying that there were no great innovations there, but overall, this is where we can notice certain characteristics of how people started to think. So during the time of the Umayyad dynasty, people started to ask questions. People were open to questions and to questioning things, and this was great because questions are what create civilizations. During the Abbasid Empire, they started to take these questions and create applications for them. When the second phase of the Abbasid dynasty came in, um, people started to fear questions. And the reason they started to fear questions is that they found that, or they thought that questions result in destabilization. And that questions end up harming the belief of the individuals. So they started to lock things down. And the idea of asking questions and the idea of philosophizing started to be hunted down. And the solution that they had was to basically go and stop these philosophers. Now, usually in any civilization, the philosophy that civilization is built on comes first. After that comes the applications. When the Islamic Empire started to eliminate philosophy, especially like with the extreme fighting against the idea of asking questions in order to protect the belief of people, in order to stabilize the government and stabilize society. um, what ended up happening is that theologians and jurists, al-fuqaha, started to basically show up, started to surface. So instead of the philosophers surfacing, those are the people that build the foundation of a civilization. What ended up happening were that the fuqaha, the jurists, started surfacing and started to control things. Now, jurists are basically they tell you what is allowed, what is not allowed, what is makruh, what is disliked, what is liked, what is mustahab. So they were the applications. But when you took out that philosophy, now you only have the applications, which means that the amount of progress that you can do is close to nil. In addition, other ideas started to come out, which is starting to divide knowledge into honorable knowledge and dishonorable knowledge. And they said that the honorable knowledge are basically the knowledge and the sciences of the Islamic tradition. Things that are related to hadith, the tafsir, the exegesis, fiqh, jurisprudence, and all of that. And everything else, like the sciences of the math, of philosophy, of physics, whatever, these are considered non-honorable or dishonorable sciences. And then a conflict erupted in the Islamic Empire because they didn't know like what is right and what is wrong. In addition to that, with this extreme focus on spirituality, what happened with that, the Sufism, the different turuq of Sufism, the different methodologies of Sufism started to rise. And that created some more conflict within the Islamic Empire. It wasn't until the Imam al-Ghazali came about and he justified through Islamic deductions that Sufism can be something that is Islamic in and within itself. But and that he also said that when you come to derive, when you come to use the other sciences, the sciences that are not related to Islam, then you want to take just the minimum from it that you need, because we're taking these sciences from other civilizations. At this time, Europe obviously started to to rise and gradually kind of rise. It didn't get to the Renaissance level yet, but it started to rise. After that, after chasing all those philosophers and basically instilling the fact that the important sciences are the ones that are related to the Islamic tradition, what ended up happening was that there was this tendency and this drive to withdraw from society. That understanding that in order for you to be righteous, you should be a humble person that is not involved in society, not involved in the materialism of this life. You just seclude yourself, you do tasawwuf, and you pray, and you just, if you need the other sciences like, medicine or whatever, you take, the minimum that you need for your life, but your focus should be that spirituality, and that, there's nothing else to do in this life. So what happened was that a lot of the scientific productions and a lot of the publications, and there were a lot of them, they were in the theology realm, but they weren't innovative. So what people were doing is that people were taking some of the summaries of some of the books, and then they were explaining them, or they were expanding on them, and then they were taking some of the expanded versions, and then they were summarizing them. And the idea came about is that our ancestors basically produced everything that is useful. So we don't need to produce anything more than that. So what we should do is that we should spend our time serving or be of servitude to the tradition that our ancestors passed down to us. It wasn't until later on when Napoleon came and basically invaded Egypt that the next phase came about, and the Islamic Empire realized how far behind they have lagged. And this was the shock. This was the shock that hit the Muslims. And from that time until now, the Muslims have been looking for some sort of balance between the maintaining the traditional roots versus taking the contemporary what the contemporary world has to offer. And while they're trying to find a midpoint in there, there were many different phrases that started to come out. Things like la ifrata wa la tafrit, like don't go too much and don't let everything go. But a lot of these phrases, they did not define exactly where's that point that we should be standing at. And until now, the Muslims and the Muslim nations are still trying to find where's that balance. Do we copy the West, or do we try to stick with our tradition, or do we do both? Or if we're not gonna do both, or if we're gonna do something else, how is that? What is that based on? And the reality is that there needs to be some serious questioning to some of the things that Muslims do without actually thinking about. And as long as we have this door of questioning closed, um, it's going to be very difficult to establish that philosophical foundation to move forward to be a contributive force in this world. I hope this was helpful. Let me know if you have any questions, and I will see you in the next episode. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.